Hey, Jeff here from the Your Move team. This week I'd like to give a shout out to Denver, Colorado, just one of the 11 cities where Your Move airs on NBC after Saturday Night Live. Weekly, we have over 51,000 viewers watching Andy in Denver. People like Lizzie, who recently wrote in saying, "Last Saturday night I stumbled across what I thought was a marriage counseling show, Staying in Love. Interesting timing as my husband was away for work and we'd been having some real difficulties. Andy's messages really spoke to me, and I've been recording the shows ever since. Even though I was not a church person growing up, I can easily identify with what he's saying. I do believe that listening to Andy has improved my life and my marriage." Lizzie, thank you so much for sharing your story. If you know people in the Denver area, encourage them to watch Your Move after Saturday Night Live. Check out yourmove.is/schedule to find a broadcast near you or someone you know. We really do believe that the next 30 minutes will help you make better decisions and live with fewer regrets. So today we're going to conclude with Andy's last message in a 6-part series, Guardrails. In areas like finances and relationships, guardrails can feel like barriers to something good. Listen as Andy tells us why they're worth having.
Well, we are finishing up this 6-part series, and if you're ready for us to move on, we're moving on after this. But we're pretty excited about this. And as we wrap up, for those of you who have not been with us for any of this series, I want to review real quick. The title of the series is Guardrails, and essentially we've taken the idea of a guardrail and built a spiritual principle out of it. We'll see how well we do. Here's what a guardrail is. You know this part. A guardrail is a system designed to keep vehicles from straying into dangerous or off-limit areas. We all know what a guardrail is. A guardrail is actually placed in an area that's safe to drive to keep us from going into places that are unsafe to drive. A guardrail is always placed a few feet or a few yards away from the area of danger. Guardrails are designed to cause a little bit of damage in order to keep you from experiencing a lot of damage. And we all know that on the other side of guardrails are places that we shouldn't go. So we asked the question a few weeks ago, what would it look like to create guardrails or to establish guardrails in other areas of our life? What would it look like to have financial guardrails? What would it look like to have moral guardrails? What would it look like to have guardrails that help with our friendships or our marriage, academic, professional, just any arena of life? What if we were to establish some guardrails that kept us back from the edge of disaster, whatever that might be? So we came up with our own definition, and here's the definition we've been using. A guardrail is a standard of behavior or a standard of personal behavior, which means you make these up yourself. A standard of personal behavior that becomes a matter of conscience. We've talked about every area. We've talked about finances, talked about moral guardrails, talked about friendships, all kinds of stuff. Today, as we wrap up, I want to address the big pushback to all of this. And if you haven't been with us, I'm not going to give you much more context than I've already given you. You can go online and listen or watch these for free. But if you've been with us, I want to talk specifically about why we don't do this. Because chances are, if you've been in this series, you've had sort of 2 tracks running. One track is, I hope my wife's listening. One track is, I got to get a copy of this for my kids. I've heard that so many times. I got to get a copy of this. In fact, a good friend of mine this morning said his kids are young. I'm going to get a copy of this and save it for when my kids are older. Okay. I hope my grandkids are listening. I hope my husband's listening. I hope everybody else is listening, because it just makes common sense that in order to keep from screwing up our lives in just about any area you can think of, we need some guardrails, some things to kind of keep us back from the brink of disaster. That's one track. The other one is this. I'm not going to do this. I don't want to do that. Because, yeah, Andy, it makes sense. Can't really argue with the logic. You didn't even need the Bible. This is just sort of common sense, isn't it? Yeah, a lot of the Bible's common sense anyway. But there's something in you, and there's something in me that says, okay, I got it. But the problem with a guardrail is it keeps me away from something I want. See, I don't want to be a good example, okay? I just want to make more money, okay? I don't want to give. I want to buy. I want to purchase. Hey, I don't want to be wise and prudent. I want to date her. I want to date him. I don't want to be fiscally responsible. I want to lease that. Okay, so the problem is, it makes a lot of sense. And I don't want to study. I want an A. Okay, and there's a way to make an A without studying. Okay, and I know you all this talk about character and the story you want to tell. But the problem is, Andy, with guardrails, they're actually just in my way. They get between me and what I want. So if you've had those thoughts, or if you've already kind of wandered in that direction, I want to kind of point you to 2 things you already know. That's basically all I do anyway. I want to talk about 2 things you already know, and then I want to tell you a story from the Bible. The 2 things you already know. Here it is. If you decide, forget the guardrail thing, that's ridiculous, I miss out on too much, I'd rather live on the edge, I'd rather live, life dangerously, however you view that. Here's the thing you need to know. Regardless of whether you have guardrails or not, the tension that you feel is not going away. Let me explain that to you. You see, if you decide, for example, you know what? I know financial responsibility and, debt and all that stuff, but you know what? I'm just going to lease a car I can't afford anyway. If you decide to lease a car you can't afford anyway, you are still going to be tempted to lease a car you can't afford anyway in about 24 months or 36 months. So leasing a car you can't afford anyway does not erase or take away the tension or the temptation to lease a car you can't afford anyway. If you decide, forget this diet I've been on, I'm just going to eat whatever I want to eat. Well, at some point you go, well, I probably shouldn't eat. Well, now you have a new point of tension. The temptation doesn't go away. And refusing to have guardrails does not eliminate the tension. It does not eliminate the temptation. All it does is erode your resolve. And all it does is bring you to a place of temptation that if you were to give in, the consequences are greater. Going back to what we talked about a few weeks ago, we talked about, married people shouldn't have meals, or a guardrail. It was a suggestion. It's not in the Bible that, married people shouldn't have meals with other married people who aren't their spouse alone, that leads to things. That's sort of a guardrail, So if I decide, well, I'm not going to have coffee with another woman other than my wife, if that's my guardrail, I go, you know what? But I really want to have coffee with her. Struggle. I really want to have coffee with her. I'm just going to have coffee with her. Well, what's happened? I've had coffee with her. It's not the end of the world, right? But what if that's not your guardrail? What if it's, well, I'm not going to have dinner. Well, I really want to have dinner with him. I'm going to have dinner with him. What have you done? Nothing. You've had dinner with him. No big deal, right? But what if it's, I really shouldn't go in. I want to go in, but I really shouldn't go in. She's inviting me in, but I shouldn't. It's a little different, isn't it? See, the tension's not going to, okay, we're in. Okay, I really want to go upstairs. I shouldn't go upstairs. She wants me to go upstairs, but I really want, my point is, now you're giggling, right? The tension, it's like, well, then keep going. No. So then what? My point is this, and this is true this is true academically, professionally, morally, it applies everywhere. At some point, you are going to put a foot on the brake, and when you do, that's where the temptation and that's where the tension begins. But the further you are in on some things, the more complicated the consequences if you say yes, and the more difficult it is to say no. So refusing to have guardrails doesn't solve anything. It just moves the battle line a little bit closer to disaster. Let me say it a different way. You see, and I've said this before, but again, this is just stuff we should remember from time to time. Your appetites are never fully and finally satisfied. Your appetites are never fully and finally satisfied. In other words, you never have a meal to end all meals. You never have a dessert to end all desserts. You never purchase a car to end all car purchases. You never have a kiss to end all kisses, okay? There is no appetite that you have that is fully and finally satisfied. In fact, you may not know this. The more you feed an appetite, guess what happens to it? It grows. That's right. So my point is this, in case you check out after this. Here's all I'm saying. If you decide, you know what, the problem with the guardrail is it keeps me from good things. It keeps me from having fun. It's going to be so weird. My friends aren't going to understand. It's so extreme. It's so, I understand that. All I'm saying is don't deceive yourself. And that's where we actually started this series. Don't deceive yourself into thinking that by saying yes, you'll never have to say no. Because wherever you decide, it's your life, wherever you say no, that's where your temptation begins. And all I'm saying to you, because I love you, is that the further back you stay from certain lines, the easier it is to resist. You win. Now, I want to tell you a story. 605 BC is where this story happens. And it's kind of cool that it's amazing we even know what happened in 605 BC. This is amazing. This is in the Bible, but it's also substantiated by secular history. 605 BC, a king that you've heard of named Nebuchadnezzar, who was located in modern-day Iraq, And in fact, Saddam Hussein sort of wanted to be the next Nebuchadnezzar and sort of modeled and styled himself out after Nebuchadnezzar. You may not have known that. Nebuchadnezzar, 605 BC, decided to conquer Israel, and specifically the city of Jerusalem. Now, Nebuchadnezzar was a brilliant guy, and here's one of the things that made him so brilliant. When he would go into a major metropolitan ancient city, instead of just destroying the city and enslaving everybody, he gave his commanders these instructions. Go into the city and arrest and take captive all the royal family, the best and the brightest, because the royal family was generally the most educated. The royal family was generally the prettiest. The royal family was generally the people who had eaten well and had taken care of themselves and been taken care of. Go into the city and take as captive the best and the brightest and bring them safely back to my capital city, Babylon. And so Nebuchadnezzar had the habit of importing the prettiest people in the world and the smartest people in the world into his capital city. Then he would put them in a training program. And he would slowly strip away all of their culture and replace it with Babylonian culture. So his capital city of Babylon, back in this period of ancient history, was a magnificent city full of brilliant people, the brightest scholars in all the world, and the prettiest people. Because he would destroy their cities, try to destroy their civilizations, but he would import the best and the brightest, recreate a culture within them, change their worldview, and in some cases send them back out to export Babylonian culture. It was very brilliant. So in 605 BC, he sends his armies into the city of Jerusalem, conquers Jerusalem, goes into the temple, the ancient temple that Solomon had built, pretty much destroys the temple, and loots it, takes all the things that are valuable and brings them to Babylon. So he enriches himself with Israel's gold, and he brings with him Israel's best and brightest. And 4 of these people that he brought with him are very famous people you've heard of. Daniel is one. The other 3 are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were part of this entourage that he captured and brought to the city of Babylon. So he gets these guys with all these other people from all over the world, begins this training process, and the goal, again, is to strip away all of their heritage and all of their belief system and create new Babylonians that, again, are the brightest people in the world. Here's how the story begins. Daniel chapter 1, verse 5. The king, that's King Nebuchadnezzar, as part of this training program, the king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table, which was awesome. Okay, this is like, wow, this is the best food in the empire we get to eat. And they were to be trained for 3 years. This was graduate school. This was, you thought you were smart before, you're getting ready to get your PhD. You're going to get your master's degree. We're going to give you a 3-year free, all paid for college education with a food allowance that comes right off the king's table. In other words, most of the captives who found themselves in this program were high-fiving each other going, oh my gosh, we thought we were going to die in the desert. Thought we were going to die like our parents and grandparents. We thought it was over for us. We thought we were going to work in the salt mines, the copper mines. We're going to live in the palace, eat the king's food, and they're going to educate us. This is unbelievable. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that, they were to enter into the king's service. So after they finished their 3-year program, they would have an oral exam, and the best and the brightest of this group would actually get to work for the king and live in the palace. This is as good as it could possibly get in the ancient world. But Daniel, who was one of these smart guys, was so smart, he saw through the whole plan, and he saw the end game, and he realized what was about to happen. Because once they rescued his life, they gave him a new set of clothes, they shaved his head, they pierced his ear, they gave him a new name. In fact, Daniel's name was actually Belteshazzar. They took a Babylonian god, Bel, and attached it with part of their language, and it meant something like, Bel will take care of you, or Bel will watch over you, or Bel is your defender. So they gave him a brand new name, and Daniel realized what was happening. That slowly, they were going to begin and continue to strip away everything he believed, everything he knew, everything he had placed his faith in. And one day he would wake up and he would be Babylonian through and through, worshiping Babylonian gods, taking part in Babylonian ceremonies, viewing Marduk or Bel or all the different gods as the God, and having put in his past everything he grew up believing is true. And he realized that we're going to do this very, very slowly, over time. Daniel recognized something that many of us completely miss when it comes to the ebb and flow of culture. Check this out. Here's what he knew that we miss. That compromise does not erase the tension. It only weakens our resolve. That compromise does not erase the tension. We think, oh, if I give in, I won't have that tension anymore. Oh, if I give in, I won't have that temptation anymore. Oh, if I give in, I won't have that pressure anymore. Daniel knew better than that. That compromise does not erase the tension. It only weakens our resolve. If you cheat once, it's way easier to cheat the second time. If you once you cross certain lines of debt and compounding debt, it's just easier to take on more debt. Once you compromise with alcohol or recreational drugs, it's just easier the second time. Come on, that second cigarette's way easier than that first cigarette. There are so many lines that once you cross them, the tension doesn't go away. It's just that your resolve is lessened. Daniel saw this, and he realized, they've changed my clothes, they've changed my name, they've changed my habits, they've changed my schedule. I realize where this is going. One day, I will have completely abandoned everything I held near and dear. And so Daniel decided to do something that I want to encourage all of us to do. Here's what the scripture tells us. But Daniel resolved. Another translation says Daniel made up his mind. Enough is enough. That's as far as I go. That's as close as I get. That's as far as you're going to be able to push me. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official, who's a guy named Ashpenaz, pretty cool name, Ashpenaz, for permission not to defile himself in this way. Now, there's a lot of speculation about why Daniel didn't want to eat the food or drink the wine. One is that this wine and food had been offered to Marduk or to Bel or to one of the Babylonian gods, and to eat this food would be acknowledging that those gods exist. So by eating this food or drinking this wine, it would be like saying, we believe these are real gods, and he thought they were pagan idols. So that may be one reason. Another explanation is that he's Jewish, and he didn't know if this was kosher, and he knew he would be violating the Mosaic law and the teachings of Moses, and so he didn't want to eat it. There are several variations on that theme, but what we know is this, that he decided, you can push me, but this is as far as I go. And what's so cool about this is because if you grew up in Sunday school, you know how this story ends. It ends pretty good for Daniel, but if you didn't know the story, Daniel, and this is the challenge for you and for me, Daniel made up his mind before he knew how his story ended. Daniel made up his mind, and he hadn't read the book of Daniel. Okay? And see, this is the part we can't even begin to imagine because we've never been in this environment. He's a teenager, away from home, surrounded by the most powerful people in the world. By saying no, he's essentially going to lose his life. And here's the amazing thing. He uses, again, 2 times, he uses the word defile. Imagine what an insult this was to his host. To eat your king's food is to defile my body. Hey, hold on, cowboy. There's some people in this city who don't have anything to eat. We're offering you the best there is, and you think it's going to defile your body? Well, aren't you somebody special? This was a total insult to Nebuchadnezzar and his entire household. He's not going to defile himself. He made a decision before he knew the end of his story. But let me tell you why he made this decision before he knew the end of his story. He made this decision because he could predict the end of his story if he didn't. He made the decision because he didn't know the end of the story. He made the decision because he could predict the end of his story. Because he, like you and like me, he knew where this was leading. And so he made up his mind. So he asked the chief official for permission. So here's what he did. He went to Ashpenaz. He says, Ashpenaz, look, he said, me and my guys, me and my posse, me and my boys, we don't want to eat this food and drink this wine. And I know this is, I know this is, going to be a problem. But we just don't want to do it. Now look at this next verse. This is the part, this is kind of the game changer for everybody. Look at this. Now, God. Now, here's why this is so important. You see, as you're evaluating your guardrails, and am I going to do this? I'm going to miss out. People are going to think I'm crazy. The guys at work are going to go, what? But you always did this before, or you're not going to go there anymore. You're not going to drink anymore. You're not going to, how this lands for you. Okay. The problem is, as you would think about your life and your future and what people are going to think and what you're going to miss out on and why even go on spring break if I'm not going to, all that kind of stuff that goes through your mind. Here's the part that you forget to factor in, and here's the part that somehow Daniel knew to factor in. It's called the now God part. It's the now God part. The now God part is that God will use your guardrails to actually not simply protect you, but to direct you. Because what happens from this point on in this story, because of Daniel's resolve, because he made up his mind, this is amazing. You read the rest of the story yourself. His decision to kind of draw a line in the sand was the thing God used to direct his entire life. If he had not made this decision, we wouldn't be telling this story. There would be a missing book of the Bible called Daniel. It wouldn't be there. Everything, more than you can possibly imagine, hung or hinged on his decision whether or not to eat the meat and drink the wine. The fact that he said no, God said, you know what, this is a defining moment. I'm going to direct your entire future by this decision. And you know what I've discovered in my own life and in talking to so many other people? You would be shocked at the number of Christians I know who would say, you know what, Andy? God became the most real to me, and I felt the clearest direction in my life, not over praying, God, show me your will for my life, but in a moment of temptation, a moment of trial, a moment of tension where I decided, in this area of my life, this is where I draw the line. This is as far as I'm going to go. And they look back and they say, you know what? That decision is the decision God used to completely redirect my career, my academic pursuits, my friendships. I would have never met my wife. I look back and I wasn't trying to make a directional decision. I was really just trying to make an ethical or moral decision. And God used that decision, not only to protect me, but to direct me. And Daniel had no idea that that's what hung in the balance of the decision. Let me tell you what I know about you for absolute sure. You have no idea. You have no idea what hangs in the balance of your decision to establish guardrails for your life. You think you do, but you don't. And my hunch is that for many of you, that decision, whether it's how you work, how you manage, people who are married, whether it's money thing, regardless, that decision for many of you will be a defining moment, and you'll look back and say, you know what? God didn't simply just protect me. And Guardrails is all about protection. I feel like God directed or redirected my entire life because I made up my mind. But God. Let's read the rest. But now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel. And Daniel didn't know this. But he realizes Ashpenaz is kind of leaning into these guys. Ashpenaz is kind of treating these guys special. And he didn't know that God had done something behind the scenes, just like you don't know what God's going to do behind the scenes. And so he goes to Ashpenaz. He says, look, me and my guys, we don't want to eat this stuff and drink this wine. And Ashpenaz says, okay, here's the problem. I can't give you an out on this. I can't let you off the hook. You've got to eat this meat and drink this wine. I understand your conviction. But if I change your diet, and if I make you an exception and then your health fails, the king's going to, have my head. I'll be responsible. I'm responsible for your health, and I know that, young guys do better if they eat a lot of meat and drink a lot of the king's wine. So I can't change my mind as much as I like you guys. However, and the Bible doesn't tell us this part, but apparently there was some kind of wink thing going on. He has said, look, but your security guard over here, maybe you can work it out with him. Wink, wink. So Daniel and his guys go to the security guard and say, we've talked to Ashpenaz, and he said no, but he thought maybe instead of the security guard and Daniel, they come up with a deal. And Daniel says, look, give us 10 days. Just let us not eat the meat and drink the wine for 10 days. Okay? Just give us 10 days. If our health is deteriorated, then we'll talk. But just give us 10 days. So somehow Ashpenaz and the security guard work it out, and they give Daniel and his guys 10 days. And after 10 days, they're healthier than the rest of the guys. They're smarter than the rest of the people. Here's how the story ends. Maybe you know this part. These 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. That God honored this decision. And then here's the conclusion. The king, Nebuchadnezzar, talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service, and this was the beginning of a journey that would end up making all kinds of difference in the nation of Israel, the book of Daniel, the lion's den thing, the fiery furnace thing. You've heard all those stories. It all began in this, and then an amazing story that happens with Nebuchadnezzar most people don't know about. It all started right here with a simple decision to say, you know what? Can't stretch any further. That's as far as I go. I'm going to make up my mind before I know the end of my story, because if I don't make up my mind, I have a feeling I know the end of my story. Now, here's the challenge for you and for me. You just got to make up your mind and do this. And to refuse to establish guardrails it's not going to remove the tension. It's just going to erode your ability to say no. You already know that. You just got to make up your mind. You got to make up your mind before you know the end of your story. Because if you don't, you can kind of predict in some areas of your life, can't you, the end of your story. Because your marriage is moving in a bad direction. Your finances are moving in a bad direction. Your relationship with your son or daughter is moving in a bad direction because you won't draw a line in terms of how much work you work and how many days of the month you travel. You, at some point, as you predict your own future, and for many of you, it's not that difficult. It really comes down to, are you going to make up your mind? And of course, let me just go ahead and tell you, this, culture is not going to help you. Culture is going to continue to bait you in the wrong direction. You've got to resolve in your own heart. You know what? You cut my hair, you can give me new sandals, teach me a new language, but that's as far as I go. Because not having guardrails doesn't remove the tension. It just moves the line to where the tension is going to be. I want to show you this verse from Proverbs and we're done. Here, this verse kind of summarizes. Check this out. This is from Solomon said this. The integrity, that's to do the right thing, of the upright, the people who are trying to do the right thing. The integrity of the upright, look at that word, guides them. And here's the thing. Again, you have no idea what God wants to do with and through you. You don't. And see, when I look at you, I think, wow, look at their potential. She's a junior in high school. Oh my gosh, she has another year of high school. I wonder what God would do with her. Wow, he's brand new in that company. I wonder what God would do with him if he walked in with a different set of standards that everybody kind of, talked about him bad behind his back. Now he's in a perfect position to be used by God. I don't know. I mean, I look at you and go, wow, imagine what God might do. But I'm telling you, you'll never know. You'll never know until you do what Daniel did and make up your mind. You know what, culture? In this area, that's all we go. That's as far as we go. That's it. I'm telling you, God will use that ethical, moral decision to direct, possibly, your entire life. But you got to make up your mind. And here's the thing. We've already agreed, for the most part, that some of our, if not all of our greatest regrets would have been avoided if we'd had guardrails. Do you know what that means? That means future regrets can be avoided altogether if you'll establish some guardrails. But it really comes down to this. You've got to make up your mind. Like Daniel, you have to resolve in your heart. That's it for me, regardless of what anybody else says. And you know what? I want that for you so much. And I know some of this for some of you seems so extreme. As common sense as it sounds like when I'm talking about it, when you go home and start trying to figure it out in your own life, it just seems so extreme. But I believe with all my heart, God will honor those decisions. And God will establish you in your crazy mixed up industry and in your crazy mixed up culture and in your crazy mixed up neighborhood with your crazy mixed up friends. God will establish you as the person through whom he will use in those crazy mixed up environments, just like he did with Daniel. But you've got to make up your mind and refuse to be deceived by the lie that by refusing to make up your mind, somehow the tension and the temptation is going away. The only thing that goes away without guardrails, is your resolve. And on the other side of those decisions, your life just gets more complicated.
Thanks so much for listening to Your Move. Check out yourmove.is/schedule to find a broadcast near you or someone you know.